Greetings, everybody. I'm Paul Dayton. My website's pauldayton.us, and I'm here to talk to you about my second book, Socialism, the Gift That Keeps on Taking. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the episode in France beginning 1789, known commonly as simply the French Revolution. Of course, students of history know there are many such episodes in history. The 1789 episode is somehow frequently and popularly invoked as a situation in which the poor, the lowest people, gained freedoms and punished their dirty oppressors and were liberated. And this is all just a work of fiction in real life. Of course, it unleashed a decade of tyranny, oppression, despotism, rigid price controls, dearth of money, dearth of goods, horrible poverty, chain of arbitrary killings, perpetual disorder. I mean, for a decade, and then they got to the dictatorship of Napoleon Bonaparte. So how this, I mean, any substance at all, not any actual knowledge of fact regarding this will cure and the ignorance necessary to swallow any of the nonsense, which is which is used to advertise this episode. So I'm just going to read you a couple of pages from the book to get you a little taste, and you can learn more by getting yourself a copy. So one of the themes of the book is the idea of the beast chaining the beast and unchaining the citizenry. Every time the beast or the government, central authority, the state, whatever you want to call it, is able to dictate prices and wages and say, try to redistribute things and get involved with agriculture and so on, that's unchaining the beast and chaining the citizenry, shackling the citizenry. So we have, this is an example, the 1789 episode in which the beast is unchained, the restraints on government, central authority are more or less non-existent, and when Big King Kong when it's well shackled to the wall, the beast serves the people. But once that big animal rips the chain off the wall, now the roles of master and servant are inverted, right? The beast does what it wants, and the people run in fear. And so this is an example of the beast unchained, France's Jacobins in the 1789 Revolution. We begin. The episode known as the French Revolution of 1789 is one of the most clear examples of the dangers of leaving the beast unchained, of the desire for a tyranny of the majority, and of permitting the least knowledgeable people, who have no financial stake in affairs, to make decisions for those who are knowledgeable and who do have skin in the game. That this period is, as of this writing, frequently and successfully invoked as one in which the least moneyed were uplifted or were freed from tyranny is both bewildering and troubling. Ignorance and arrogance are the only two explanations for touting such falsehoods, discounting, of course, dishonesty. Some of the myths prevalent today regarding the episode, which began in 1789, were in existence as early as 1954. In a book published in that year, William W. Lockwood wrote, quote, "The French Revolution, for example, despite its slogans, was hardly what we would today call a democratic revolution in either its inception or its outcome. Its actual consequence was to complete the emancipation of feudal serfdom, to establish a unified nation-state, and to proclaim a new legal freedom and equality under the ascendant power of the middle class," end quote. I go on. In actuality, 10 years of horrific poverty and tyranny, leading to the dictatorship of Napoleon Bonaparte, are the actual outcomes of this 18th century French Revolution. Like bank robbers in a hostage situation, the pretenders of power and authority were mired in a predicament which they were ill-equipped to facilitate, and which continued growing further and further beyond their control, as desperation, betrayal, and despotism filled the hours which delayed their inevitable demise. We now cure the ignorance of those in need, while refreshing the knowledge of those who are already familiar with this episode. The next section is background and initial episodes. During the 1780s, the Catholic Church, comprised of approximately 100,000 members, owned 5 to 10% of the land in France. The job-creating and goods-providing merchants, known as the bourgeoisie, were often resentful that their own earned excellence was paralleled or even surpassed by the luck of the draw into which the nobility had been born. During the period 1713 to 1789, French foreign trade increased fivefold thanks to the bourgeoisie. Independent agrarian men, shop owners, as well as larger scale merchants made up the majority of the so-called Third Estate. However, there were a large contingent of wage earners who, as a class, had seen a pay increase of 22% by the 1780s, as compared to their wages during the 1730s, while prices obtained for consumers' goods rose 65% during this period. So you had people who were presuming they didn't change seats at the dinner table, right? You have like just wage earners, then you have merchants, that they didn't graduate from wage earners to merchants at any point during that time. If a person remained in the wage earner class the entire time, they would be facing this difficulty of consumer goods rising in prices far outpacing their own wages, if we take averages. During the 1780s, more than 80% of the French lived outside of the cities. The peasants were their own men, and certainly were not serfs enslaved to their lord on assigned lands, a contrast to the servitude that was the case in other lands practicing feudalism. The peasant either farmed his own land, farmed land which he rented as a sharecropper, or farmed as a hired man for another. Those who bought what were called manors, which included peasants and merchants, served some functions which present-day counties in the USA serve. The tracts of land within this manorial village could be bought or sold freely, but annual taxes, in addition to transfer fees when exchanged, were due to and collected by the owner of the manor. We see here this simple little illustration, this little data table. French land ownership in the 1780s. Peasants were the largest land-owning class, owning 40% of all the land in France during the 1780s. Next, we have a tie at 20% apiece. The merchants owned 20% of the land in France during that time, while the nobles owned 20% of the land, and the church owned 10%. So it's important to know that the next thing we're going to do here is we're just going to show that during the winter of 1788-89, it was a harsh one for France, with lows of negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Work was suspended for a lengthy time. The paycheck-to-paycheck crowd couldn't buy any food or firewood because work was suspended. Bread was rationed and trade heavily regulated by government. Even those who paid were limited to small quantities from sellers. The bread shortage was not resolved until July of 1789. U.S. imports sold at high prices to the French helped to weather the storm for France. By July of 1789, the price of bread in France was the highest seen since the death of Louis XIV in 1715. A lack of price controls outside of France facilitated access to sustenance, right? Price controls, the tight hand of the grip of the beast around the windpipe of the people makes for shortages, exacerbates shortages, whereas the unclenched grip, the deregulation, the freedom, enables people to access the necessaries of life. We will go on to show from there the political trouble, basically the king of France at that time wanted to reform what we'll call a parliament or a congress, or States General was called in France, to the benefit of the lowest people, of the least moneyed people, who then, those least moneyed people, sulked off like children, decided to countermand the whole thing, came in like thugs, and unleashed a decade of horrid tyranny and poverty, which is detailed in what do you want to say? Detailed in great detail for the remainder of that section. I spend about 30 or 40 pages on the French episode in this book specifically, and I encourage you to learn more at pauldayton.us. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.